Thank you all for coming this evening. I couldn't be happier to introduce you to two of my favorite editors, both of which have seen various pieces of my work and sometimes, ashamedly, first draft dribble.
Yeah.
Yep. Which I have promised never to do again. So, for those of you who don't know, we have Judy L Mohr, who is my favorite Kiwi editor, and Ryan Steck, who is my favorite mystery and thriller editor. Normally, he is acting as the role of reviewer and talking about books from the perspective of as a reviewer and talking to readers. So this is fun for him because he doesn't normally get to talk to a room full of writers. With that, I am going to disappear and let them take it away as soon as I find the button to turn off my camera.
Yeah, hi guys, and welcome, and thank you so much for coming back for another Ask an Editor session. It's been fantastic doing all these things that we've been doing. And for those of you who haven't registered, we're talking today to the real book spy, who is Ryan Steck. Ryan, why don't you tell us a bit more about yourself and how you got into being an editor in the first place? I want to know this one.
Yeah, sure. Well, I wish I knew, kind of. I get asked that question a lot. Same thing with, being a critic. I was editing before I was a critic, actually. I think a lot of people don't know that. And Anne's right. I never talked to a group of writers, really. I don't really talk about editing a lot publicly. That's sort of like people don't want to see how the sausage is made type of deal. Readers don't care. They just want to see the finished product sitting on the bookstore shelf, pick it up. They don't really care how it got there. So I'm excited about this. This is fun. So I'm a failed sports journalist is the easiest way to answer that. I started off as a beat reporter for the Detroit Lions, a football team here. And I was never diagnosed with dyslexia until I was an adult. And I was having a lot of struggles writing and then self-editing, relying a lot on my copy editors as a reporter. And so I saw my doctor and found out I was dyslexic, and they said, hey, read a lot. If you read a lot, you'll help yourself get over that. So I dove into the book world and became a big fan of Vince Flynn and his Mitch Rapp series. And in 2013, Vince passed away. And I was like this crazy guy. I was sort of like practicing to get back to journalism. I thought that's where I would go. So I read his whole series and I took like hundreds of pages of notes on it as practice for me. And when he died, I ended up being like this guy that had all the notes on the franchise. So when they hired a new author to take over, and this is like a mega best-selling, #1 New York Times best-selling series with, they do 1 million hardcovers every year. Vince didn't have notes. He didn't have anything. So when Kyle Mills, the author who replaced him, signed up, he said, I need notes, I need stuff. They had just found me. I don't even really know how, to be honest with you, but they knew I had all these notes, and they sort of pulled me in. Simon & Schuster, Vince's publisher, and I started working a little bit with Kyle. And from there, I had an offer from different newspapers and magazines to write book reviews. And at the time, I thought it was just a stepping stone to get back to journalism, and it stuck, to be honest with you. So I just kind of kept doing it. That was how I got into being a critic. I sort of hated writing for other people because they made you you didn't get to pick what books you reviewed. You know what I mean? Like they would just give you titles to review. That was not fun for me. So eventually I sort of branched out on my own. And I launched The Real Book Spy. And now I get to be the boss, which is always better because I get to review what I want, put other people on stuff I don't want to do. So it's great. But I maintain a full-time editing career. And I did get into that a little bit before being a critic. And I don't know a lot of other people who both edit and are critics. I have one friend who wrote for the AP who also does some editing. But yeah, it's harder because that's something that, editors, we work, and this, Judy, but we work in the shadows. No one knows about us.
Yeah, I think it's the editor from Baltimore Sun had actually said it the best, that our job as an editor is to make sure that the writers don't make an ass of themselves.
Yeah, right. Well, you get no credit, but if there's something bad in the book, you get blamed all the time. A typo or something didn't work in the plot, you always are blamed. But other than that, really, you don't ever get much praise. I about fell on the floor. Ted Bell, who's a good friend of mine, someone I've worked with, he's a New York Times bestselling author of the Alex Hawke series. In his last book, Dragonfire, he didn't just mention me in the acknowledgments. He wrote a paragraph about me. And it was so flattering, I thought it was a joke, which might have hurt his feelings. But I didn't think it was real. And it turned out it was real. It made the hardcover. They printed it that way. And I told my wife it was so flattering. I said, if I die anytime soon, just add to the end of that, survived by his wife and 6 kids, and you've got my eulogy. That was fantastic. Other than that, no one ever really, you don't get credit, and that's the job. We shouldn't. Your job is to make the writer look better. I'm also a writer. So it's really funny, and I know you are as well, obviously. So we wear the different hats. When I'm an editor, it's very different than being a critic. And then when I'm writing, you can never self-edit. You can never edit your own work. Not truly. I mean, you can go through and look for typos and stuff like that. The problem is you're never going to get an honest opinion of your own work because it lives inside of you. It's been part of you for too long. So I use an editor too, For me, it's my agent. For me, it's my agent because he was an editor before he was an agent. So it's just funny. In publishing, everyone always seems to wear at least 2 hats. My agent was an editor, now an agent. I'm a critic and an editor and an author and all that. It's just funny how it works out.
Yeah, I think that is one of the things that we found, that some of the editors have all got different hats on them. And it's because you can't do just one thing all the time. I think that's really what it is. So since we're talking about that sort of thing, what is your editorial process? And delve into a little bit of your editorial process of your own personal stuff, as well as what you do for clients, because I know it is even from what I do, it is a completely different process set that you use.
Oh yeah, it's really funny because so for my own stuff, my process, I go through it. I hope it's clean. I think it's good. I send it to my agent, and even though I'm an editor and I should know what to expect getting back and edit, it always hurts when you're the writer. Like there's just no way around that. It always hurts a little bit. It stings. And so, he'll joke with me because I'm an editor, like, didn't you expect this? But I do what every writer does. I get it back from my agent and I'm like, dear God, you just dipped the whole thing in red ink. What is this? Like, I'm never going to get through this. And he's like, you're an editor, you know what you're doing. And I'm like, you want me to cut all of this? And he's like, how many people did you tell to cut stuff this week? And I'm like, oh gosh, it's always very different. So when I'm editing my own stuff, I try to get as far away from it as I can, get it to my agent, and then forget it. And I have found that, if I really forget my own stuff, when you come back to it with fresh eyes, you start looking at things and you're like, oh, wow, I can't believe I wrote that. Either good or bad, by the way. You know how you read something, you're like, wow, I can't believe I wrote that in a good way. Like, that's really good. It didn't even sound like me. It's infinitely worse when it's something bad. And you're like, oh, wow, I wrote that. It's kind of miserable too. So
guilty.
Yeah, I do it all the time too. Visual metaphors can be really tough. And I edited something that was really good a while back, but it was like, as bullets rang out, sparks flew like a cluster of stars cascading around me. And I thought, it's a whole lot better than what I pitched. That's pretty good. So, but sometimes I'll get back a visual metaphor that I wrote and I'm like, what the hell was that? I think we all do that. And it's why the relationship between author and editor is key. There's got to be a lot of trust there.
Yeah, definitely. And it also has to be that a writer or the editor gets you and gets your voice and gets what it is you're trying to achieve as well. And I think we will come back to that. But that, I think, is one of the key things. We had a question here from Liz at one point where she was asking, how do you move your mindset from the writer and into the editor? And I'm going to ask the opposite question. How do you move from the editor into the writer?
So I'm not going to lie, that part is great, because what happens when you're the editor, and I'm sure you know this too, it can be wildly frustrating. You're going through something and you're proposing changes that will make the story better. I'm trying to think of a nice way to say this, but sometimes authors are not receptive to things. And look, I get it, because as a writer, I don't like it either. Like I just said, it always hurts a little bit. So when you come back with something like, hey, the final act didn't work here, I would really, and my style as an editor is not, so I call it the Simon Cowell approach. I don't like that. If you watch like American Idol or whatever he's on, Simon Cowell is great at telling people they're terrible, but he doesn't always make them better. I think anyone could come in and go, this book was terrible. This book sucks. What are you doing? That doesn't make you better. That doesn't fix the problem. And an editor's job is to fix the problem. I like to look at it and say, this didn't work, but this might. Or really challenge writers, as you know. I'll really challenge them and say, and I'll keep sending it back. Like this wasn't quite, so in that sense, it's freeing as a writer because now I can do whatever I want. Now when so when you're writing, it's like, oh, I can do anything I want now. I suggested someone else do something because this was an issue and now I can do it for myself or whatever. It's very freeing. I like to get in and write stuff that, it's for me first. Probably is not stuff people would want to read on a first draft, but no one's first draft is good. No one's. It's not even supposed to be,
You hear that, people? A first draft is not supposed to be good. It is supposed to be rewritten.
Yeah, I mean, it's the famous saying, you can edit bad pages, you cannot edit blank pages, right? You just got to get the story out. Get the story out. And I certainly with my clients, is what I always tell them. Just get the story out so I can see it too. When you're pitching me a story, it can sound great. We need to see it on the page. Let's see what that looks like, in manuscript form. The execution has to be there. It doesn't need to be perfect. I can look at it with you and get that 30,000 foot view of what you're trying to do with your story, your characters, your world building, and we can go from there. But you got to get it out. And a lot of writers get trapped trying to make what they have perfect. And they might be 20,000 words in, they might be less. And they're constantly going back to re-edit all those words. They want them to be really perfect. The problem is they never add on the other 80,000 words. And they spin their tires for so long, they don't finish. And that's one of the biggest reasons people don't finish the writing projects.
Yeah. So, okay. So we're taking that first draft and we're going into editing your second draft. So we're talking about your own work for the moment. How do you shift your brain into the draft mode versus I have to pull this apart mode? How do you shift your brain?
Yeah. So to me, for me, it's being self-critical. You really want to look at it, detach yourself like you didn't write it, and be honest with yourself about it. One of the things that I really like to do, and this is a secret tip, everybody outlines before they write. Well, not everybody, but usually you write the outline. If you do outline, you outline before you write. I like to take what's there and then outline it.
That's what I do.
Yeah, so as an editor, the outline's key for me. So when someone hires me, if they're still writing, and I'm always like, hey, let me see the outline. You can tell me the story, but I can't see it. I have to be able to see it. And if you don't have it on the page, I need to see the outline. I can go over an outline with you. You can spot red flags. You can tell where the pacing might be down a little bit. Hey, you probably need something here, there. You get a real sense, a real feel for that. For me, detaching myself and taking what is there and then outlining it allows me to get a condensed view to really sort of self-analyze the pacing. If the plot involves some twists, some turns, some build-up, you get a sense to really look at all that real quick. And it's really helpful to me.
Cool. Okay, so you specialize in thrillers and crime fiction mainly.
Yeah.
I heard a little rumor that you are potentially branching out, but not very much. What are some of the nuances associated with krillers? What's a kriller? With crime fiction and thrillers that some newer writers might not understand?
So if you're going to write a series, whether it's thriller or crime, forget having the best story idea. You need the best character, right? So everyone wants that story idea and everyone's looking for something that no one's ever done. You'll never find it. There are no new original ideas. There's your take on it. And you can have a special, unique take that is different than everybody else's. But it's a little bit like this. I mentioned that I really love Mitch Rapp and Vince Flynn. So I have this running joke with Kyle Mills, who took that series over. And every year when he's like, man, I don't know what the next book's going to be about, I tease him. And I say, look, if it's just about Mitch Rapp, running errands and going to the supermarket and picking up his dry cleaning, we're all going to read it because we love Mitch Rapp. So in this world, and publishers know this, you know, it's all about world building, franchise building. That's what you want. These characters that can anchor a series. You've got to perfect your character. If readers don't like your character, but they absolutely love the story, well, they're still not going to like the book. They can go, that's really, you know, interesting story idea, but they're not drawn to it. They don't fall in love with that. You fall in love with characters, and that's the biggest thing.
I think the way I see it is that we start reading a book because the plot is interesting, but we keep reading the book because the characters are interesting. And that's the way I see it. And so I always say, no, you need to, the character arc has to be so closely entwined with that plot, or it just doesn't, people just don't want it. They don't care.
Yeah.
Okay. So what are some of the common issues that you see in the writing that comes across your desk as the editor here? What are some of the common errors? And I'm like, uh-oh, because I'm pretty sure I'm guilty of some of them.
Well, the biggest thing of all, well, the smallest one is always grammatical things, right? And no one cares about those. So you have copy editors, you know, and I love copy editors. It's surprising how many people don't know where a comma goes, but you don't need to be an author, honestly. The biggest issue that I see is pacing. It's something that will make or break you. You have to have really good pacing. So, and I don't mean this in a negative way towards the younger generation, but their attention spans are not what maybe ours are when it comes to reading a book. So in my genre, when you look at like Tom Clancy, those books would probably not sell as well today, just like they were published 20 years ago. You know, it's a new world. So pacing is key. The thought behind it is, if you ever give the reader a spot to put the book down, they will. We're competing with so many things right now. Everyone's got their phone. Everyone's on Twitter, right? Like
Netflix.
The younger generation of readers, they can't go 2 minutes without checking Twitter. Like, you can do other things. You can watch TV. So my wife is really big into crocheting and knitting. You can watch TV and do that, right? You can draw and watch TV. You can do a lot of like multitasking with other forms of entertainment. You cannot with reading, not really. It's the one thing that sort of demands all your attention. It's probably the number one reason why audiobooks are the fastest growing format right now, because you can multitask with audiobooks. You can be driving down the road. I really do not recommend driving down the road with a hardback or a Kindle in your face. That's not, yeah, but you can put on an audiobook and still take in the story and be doing something else. So getting people to really pay attention to your work, you're competing now. You didn't used to be. 20, 30 years ago, that was not the case. So in today's world of publishing, writers have to constantly re-engage their readers. And the biggest flaw I see in different manuscripts is people end their chapters way too clean. You know, like the scene ends and we're just going to end it here real tidy. But if you do that, they're going to put the book down. So when you're self-editing, go through, look at it and ask yourself, like, am I pulling the reader onward here? Am I forcing them to turn the page? Because if you're not, they're going to put the book down, probably go to sleep, might pick it up the next day. But the goal with, and yes, with thrillers, but also with crime books, the goal is to have people staying up all night reading your stuff. I mean, that's kind of the goal of an author, right? You love to hear, don't get me wrong. There's always some people that are like, oh my gosh, I read your book in one night. And you're like, really? Because it took a whole like year or 18 months to write that. Glad you read it like 7 hours. But that's actually a compliment. I mean, it really is. You know, today's world especially, if you're holding someone's attention for 7, 8 hours and they're staying up all night long to finish and read your book, that's awesome. That's what it's all about. The books that have always stuck with me the longest as a reader, they're the ones where, you know how when you're in bed and you have to work the next day, so you're reading a chapter and it's getting late and you tell yourself, just one more chapter. And then that chapter ends and you're like, whew, just one more chapter. And you keep lying to yourself for like the next 7 hours and you stay up all night reading the book. And that's what I love. I love that reading experience when it comes to thrillers, mystery, and crime. I think that's what it's all about. So pacing is king. It's right there with characters.
Yeah, no, that's cool. So, okay, follow on. What are some of your tips that you have for maintaining that tension and building the pacing and getting that right? What are some of your tips?
So make the reader turn the page. Whether you're going to use a cliffhanger or foreshadowing or asking a question that has to be answered, make them turn the page. I've given this example. Honestly, you and I have probably gone over this example that I'm going to give. So many writers, I'm like, hey, put a cliffhanger here. They're like, nothing happens. The guy goes up to bed and his best friend comes over with a 6-pack of beer to watch the football game. Believe it or not, you have a cliffhanger there. This doesn't have to be some monumental, huge thing in order to finesse the reader into turning the page. Literally, if a guy goes to bed and he's had a rough day and he hears a knock, knock, knock on the door and he comes downstairs and he opens the door, you have a cliffhanger right there. Open the door and he says, I can't believe you'd show your face here at this time of night. End chapter. Cut it right there. Because the reader doesn't know who's there. They got to turn the page to find out. When they turn the page, we've got them from one chapter to the next. Now re-engage them, right? So it's the best friend, and he says something like, hey, I know you had a rough day. I got a 6-pack of beer. We're going to watch a football game together. Get out of my way. And he comes walking inside. Well, without that, if you end there, you're done. You're probably going to put the book down. That ended too clean. So if you cut it and you segue properly, you're going to get the reader from one chapter to the next. That's the goal. Every chapter ending should be trying to pull the reader onward.
Okay, so just a build-up question. I just see it sitting here, and I am going to ask it now because it is a similar sort of question. Are shorter chapters better or longer chapters? Which ones do you think?
Shorter, yeah.
Yeah? Because I'm of the frame of mind that it depends. That it really depends.
So by genre, it can really depend by genre. But if we're talking thriller, mystery, crime, shorter is probably better. That's especially true when you get to the final act or the climax of the story. Yeah.
Yeah. I think you'll find that in thrillers and crime, the chapters range anywhere between 500 to 1,500 words. I think the longest I've seen is maybe 2,000. I think one of my longest ones is probably 2.5. And you've told me multiple times you need to deal with this.
Yeah. So I think 1,500 words is honestly kind of perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. But when you are talking about, like say fantasy, so you started talking about things like Brandon Sanderson, he writes, it's a completely different thing. He's writing, some of his chapters are 10,000 words. They're really long.
And you can get away with it in different genres like that, even some sci-fi. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it is because it is a different genre. It has a different mechanism, a different way of doing it. But in thrillers and crime.
But here's the idea behind it, right? So break it down. Publishers know that readers generally read at a certain time each day. So the people who read every day, believe it or not, most of them read right before bed, right? I think a lot of us probably do, right? You get in bed and you read. So when you get in bed, you probably tell yourself like, oh, I've got an hour to read and then I'm gonna go to bed, right? So if in that hour, let's say you're a slow reader and you read 50 pages, okay? So you're gonna read for an hour, you read 50 pages or so, and you only have one chapter. What's your thought when you're done? You're going to literally close the book to go to bed and you're like, this book takes forever. I only read one chapter in that last hour, right? Now, if I take those same pages and I cut them into 5 chapters of 10 pages, right? But I segue between them so that you have to keep turning the page, the thought process is different. You end reading for an hour and what do you say to yourself? Like, holy crap, this book is so fast. I just read for an hour and I read 5 chapters. It's the same thing. It's the same words, essentially, cut a little differently with a transition and segue between them, but it feels like you got more out of your time.
Yeah, right? Okay, I can understand.
Yeah, that's sort of the logic behind it. Again, these are like just little editorial tips, but like you're not really changing anything. You're just making the reader think they're getting more from it, and then you're constantly re-engaging them.
Okay, so you've talked about foreshadowing a lot.
Yeah.
How necessary is it to foreshadow certain things within the plot, particularly say the plot twist that may happen at the end?
Yeah, listen, I really believe it. So here's the best twist, okay? Everyone says the best twists are the ones you never saw coming. I don't believe that. I believe that's a part of it, but the best twists are the ones that you never saw coming, but that when you look back on the plot, it's the only thing that ever made sense, right? Those are the best. So if you want an example of that, even if you don't love thrillers, I would highly recommend picking up Harlan Coben's Fool Me Once. They should have titled that book Fool You Over and Over and Over Again, but that didn't sound as good or look as good on the book, I'm sure. So Fool Me Once. He is the king. Harlan Coben's the king of the double twist. That is a book, as a critic, I read. It genuinely made me mad because I should have seen the twist coming. Look, as an editor, a writer, a reader, I don't get surprised a lot. And I have like probably an ego thing about it where I'm like, no, you didn't fool me. Okay. And he absolutely made me look foolish. I had no idea. His publicist at the time sent me an email as a critic and said, every 50 pages, write down what you think is going to happen in the end. So I thought, okay, how hard could that be? I couldn't have been more wrong. It was genuinely shocking to me when we got to the end and I was like, holy smokes, how did he do that? Then you look back on it and you're like, that's the only thing that ever made sense. How did I not see that? It's the only thing that makes sense. So you need to foreshadow enough that when you get there, readers aren't like, huh? Where'd that come from? It's like, oh my gosh, how did I not see that? That's the twist that you want. So yeah, foreshadowing a little bit and being really careful about where you put that in there, absolutely necessary.
Yeah, I think another way of saying the same thing, this is Howard Taylor has actually said this, is inevitable, surprising, but inevitable. So when you look at it, it is the only way that things could have gone, but you're like, wow.
Yeah.
So yeah, and that's I think it's the best way. Surprising, but inevitable. It has to go that way.
Yeah, you can't just go for shock value. You know what I mean? Anyone can do that. Anyone can just throw something shocking in there. That's sort of cheating if you don't properly lead up to it, though. You know what I mean? It feels cheap. Okay, yeah, that was shocking, but that came out of nowhere. That's not the same thing. That doesn't resonate with readers the same way as, wow, when looking back on that, you see all the buildup, and that was a huge twist that really landed solidly because of that.
Okay, so we just see, the clue drops. Now, we see this a lot in crime fiction in particular, where they do the logic leap that you're like, whoa, where'd that logic leap come from? Right. Oh no. Right. So how do you keep, this is a question from Janie. I don't know if Janie's here, but she did send it through earlier. How do you keep the mystery going without giving away who the bad guy is too soon, but yet at the same time, just pulling that reader along with the journey? What are some of your tips for that?
Well, if I had the secret recipe for that sauce, I'd be, so rich right now. I would be selling that to every writer, but here's the thing. It comes down to the plotting. And to me, this comes back to outlining. And I know that not everyone outlines. Pull Ann back in here and ask if she likes outlining. You know as well as I do how that conversation's going to go. I'm the world's biggest hypocrite because I hate outlining before I write. But as an editor, I tell everyone you need to outline. The devil's in the details. It's hard to answer that question because every story's different, but that's what the outlining is for, the plotting. You really have to have all that in there.
A tip that I can easily give those who are writing crime and interested in writing crime, Jeff Simon, who is a forensics investigator with the FBI and has been for 25 years, he does a lot of courses for writers about how to write crime and how to do this. And one of the things that he sees is that even if you're a pantser, you plot out your crime. So you basically, you take your initial crime scene and you work out the bad guy and you work out the one bit of evidence that is, whoa, that is the evidence that will catch that bad guy. And then you figure out what's all the other evidence that's along the way and you pepper them in. But Absolutely. He's plotting out the crime. You're not plotting out your story. You're just plotting out when the evidence drops are going to happen. So that way you're not making that logic leap, because that logic leap is so not satisfying.
Well, and Lee Child, best-selling author of the Jack Reacher series, he's not an outliner, but he said, ask a question in the beginning that demands an answer, but don't answer it till the end.
Okay. That's an interesting way to phrase that.
I know, right? Yeah. I mean, if you ever read his books, a lot of times Jack Reacher, right off the jump, is into something. You're like, huh, what the heck's going on here? You're going to find out in 400 pages. So just strap in and you know it's coming. You know, as a reader, you know this is coming, and that does help drive his pacing and his story in a way that very few can pull off.
All right, so there is another side to this equation, and that's the backstory.
Yeah.
Where's the balance? So that was a question that somebody asked was, you know, is too much backstory cliche? And the answer is yes, it is.
Yeah,
but
nothing can bog down a book faster than backstory.
But where is the balance? How do you find the balance?
So, yeah, it's a huge problem that writers struggle with, trying to put backstory in. By the very definition of backstory, you're moving back, you can't be moving forward. Nothing will kill your pacing faster than too much backstory or flashback scenes, right? So, yeah, it's a problem. Look, as an editor, I like to put them right in the middle. That's where I like it. You want to start fast, really hook the reader and pull them in, deal with backstory later, because the idea is they already are hooked on the plot, and hopefully they're falling in love with the characters. So they're going to hang around for a little bit in the middle there because they know they're going to get some questions answered, hopefully towards the end with plot and, you know, whatever the crime might be, or if it's a thriller, whatever, you know, the attack scenario is the hero's trying to stop, right? Less is more with backstory, often is the case, and try to break it up. Do not do like pages of backstory ever. Like that's a big one for me. I cut that right away. As an editor, I come right in and say like, yeah, no, this needs to be cut up. Infuse these things within what's already there, but do not have pages of backstory running consecutively. Nothing bottoms out the pacing faster than that.
I think there's also a trick to doing it, because you can incorporate backstory in the setting without realizing that you've done it. A good example of that would be, say, a guy walks into the room and he notices that the drapes are closed, but they're never closed. And the TV is not on, but it's always on. And the smell of the office or smell of the room is cold and dank and musky, but where's the smell of the cookies? So you suddenly get, just having that cross with the setting, you get the backstory at the same time.
I mean, so you can sew backstory, little beats like that into your narrative context. That's what we call that as editors. So when you're adding narrative context to something, sometimes a guy walks into a room and flicks the radio off, right? And that's all we need. Sometimes the radio's on, he comes in and turns it off. Sometimes, though, if you're trying to develop your character a little bit, he comes in, and as he picks up the radio, he thinks back and remembers that it's the radio his father built him, that, you know, he's had for 40 years, and he used to use as a child to help fall asleep at night. And that's why his dad built it for him. And maybe he remembers whatever he listened to, Dodgers games as a kid, listening to baseball. Whatever it is, then move on. So you've got this little tidbit in there, and he smiles, he turns the radio off, and he walks out. That works too. You can sew in little tidbits here, adding narrative context to certain elements of certain scenes without having to dump huge, you know, paragraphs or pages of just backstory.
I think that makes sense to me, and I hope that makes sense to everybody. But of course, it makes sense to me.
Yeah,
because this is my wheelhouse. So yeah. Okay, so it is becoming, I've noticed, a lot more favorable in writing to have. Now we call it deep point of view, but I was watching an interview with Brenda Copeland yesterday or the day before or something like that. Brenda Copeland, for those who don't know, is an editor that she's been working for years, and she used to be Stephen King's editor. So we've got somebody who she knows a thing or two. But she calls it close to the page. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was an interesting euphemism for deep point of view. But what are your thoughts about deep point of view, and what are some of the tricks that you can?
Yeah. So I quite like it. You know, anytime you hit like third person close and you're very close to the page, that's my preferred style to read. I like reading that. Yeah, I love it. Tips for it? Yeah, this is probably the biggest one I get from clients of mine that are trying to write third person close. It's tricky. It really is. The ones who do it naturally do it very, very well. Don Winslow is the guy, just Stephen King. Not everyone does it naturally. So what I always try to say is, don't make observations in the narrative. Have everything close to your character's POV. So let me explain that because that's really confusing. So let's say someone's writing a book right now about our conversation, right? And they're breaking down what we're saying. Well, whose point of view is this from? Right? So whose point of view is this from? Because it's going to look dramatically different whether it's mine or yours, right? Yeah. So we can't head hop. So let's say it's your point of view. And, you know, and the question is, Ryan says, hey, did you understand that? And you were literally right. Does Ryan, do you understand that? Asked Ryan. I do, said Judy. But if it's from your point of view, you could very easily then put in the narrative, but really Judy had no idea what he was talking about, right? That's all fine and well. But if you're going to write it from my point of view, how do you convey that? And how do you stay close to the page? So make the observations through your character's POV, not in the narrative. You can't head hop. So how do we show that? So if it's my point of view, it might be, you see what I'm saying? Asked Ryan. I do, said Judy. Does that make sense? It does. But Ryan could tell by the look on Judy's face that she had no idea what he was talking about. That's my observation. Even though we're third person, we're keeping it close. Rather than the narrator saying she didn't understand, the observation comes from your character. And it allows you to tell the story closer to their point of view. That's like one really small tip. I mean, it's a hard thing. It's much bigger than that. We would need an hour to talk about that at length, but that's like one really minor tip.
Oh, it's more than 1 hour, trust me, because I'm in the process of writing a presentation for exactly this deep point of view thing.
Tough.
And it's so huge. It's a huge topic. And
there's no, you did it kind of okay either, by the way. You did it great or it's really bad. That's where it's at. Like, seriously, I've never seen one that's like, oh, it's kind of okay. I've never seen that as an editor, you know, working with people, or even as a critic. It's always like, wow, that was so good, or like, wow, they really should have wrote it like that. There's very, I can't even think of one that would come in the middle for me. But yeah, some people do it naturally, and I'm jealous of them. The same way I'm really jealous of the people who just have like really good descriptions of things and visual metaphors. That's not my forte. So when they do it so easily, I'm like, how'd they do that? But like pacing and transitions, character development, I can do pretty easily. And I think some people struggle with that. Writing third person close is highly effective. It's probably more effective for crime. And as you know, Judy, that's super effective when you're writing the villain. Nothing will creep you out faster than if you can have a really good villain and you stay very close to them. That's creepy. When you read that, you're like, this is awesome, but it's creepy, but I kind of love it, but I don't, but I do, but I got to keep reading it. You just elicit all those emotions from people. So yeah, it's definitely really hard to do. That's one tiny small trick, but boy, there's like a lot more to it.
The reason why I'm laughing when Ryan made that comment was because we were talking, it was one of my manuscripts, and we were trying to figure out what to do about the beginning because we have problems with drawing the reader in the beginning. And Ryan had this great idea. Let's just write it from the bad guy's point of view. Let's go for gold and write it in first person. Yeah, no, I wrote it and then I sent it to Ryan along with a note saying, please do not ever make me do this again. This is creepy, dude, and I do not like this hate. Please don't do this.
But you know what? And I won't give anything away because that's not my job. But the answer to the problem that we had there was deep diving the POV to the other character.
Yeah, it was. And it was going, but it was keeping it still in the third. Yeah, but instead of going to the bad guy, we actually went to the victim. The victim,
and stayed very close, and it really worked. I think it's by the way, and even Ann knows this, it's your best chapter too. That's the funniest part, was Judy was furious with me because I kept sending it back to her like, no, it's not there yet. And she's, what do you want from me? You know, and I'm like, just, you know, can you do it better? And you keep trying to give notes, and we were going back and forth, and it sucks. That's the part of the writing that people don't see. But you have to have an editor who will push you. And I know that's the hardest I ever pushed you. It's still your best chapter.
Yeah, and it was just one of those things. And I still like the chapter, and I still, but don't ever make me do
But you know what the best part was? You were so lost in trying to figure out what I wanted. And then once we had the last conversation, you sat and wrote it and absolutely crushed it. Yeah. I mean, it worked. It works.
Yeah, so that's okay. So carrying on, coming back. So coming back with this editing, we've had another question from Liz, who, when you are editing and you rip out huge chunks, large chunks of the manuscript, what are some of your tips on reconstructing the story and getting that manuscript going and flowing again?
Well, my first tip would be outline so we don't have to do that, right? Because that's miserable. It's really hard to do. When you're ripping sections out and trying to put it back together, it's hard to not end up with Frankenstein's monster on that thing. Everything just looks sewn up and you can kind of tell. So I always like to have a buffer. So if you're going to really cut, and don't ever try to merge things like ever, always write something to buff between that to transition and smooth that out. Always. There's a lot of writers, like, you'd be shocked how many are like, oh, I can just cut this and it still flows together okay. Yeah, but no, it doesn't. That's the problem, because it was never meant to. You wrote something in between. When you're taking out, you need to replace it with something. Don't ever think you can just put two ends together. Now, granted, you might be pulling out 1,000 words, and you can smooth that out and buff it with 2 sentences. That's totally fine. Never try to put 2 ends together after you cut something out, though. It will end messy. It always does.
I think, again, with that, I think that depends on the setting and depends on the story. Because I know there was one chapter, and you hadn't seen this particular manuscript, Ryan, it's sitting in the metaphorical drawer, but there was one story that I have where a main character, and spoiler alert, she dies sort of in the earliest, it's a fantasy, so she comes back to life. So sorry, this is the way it works. But there's an intermediate step in between where you have the people, her friends, trying to bring her back to life and then coming to the conclusion that she's dead. And when I read the one chapter and into the next chapter that was after it, it flowed, and it didn't even skip a beat. At which point I was like, yeah, that chapter in the middle was not needed.
Okay, so let me add that too, by the way. So let me add, because if you cut something so you're ending the chapter in a different place, you're probably okay without trying to replace whatever you just cut into the next chapter. That is probably one area that you are okay just plain cutting. You know, that you can generally get away with. Also, I could see how on fantasy and sci-fi, those rules aren't exactly the same. You know, yeah.
But I think there's been a couple of times in the stuff that you and I have worked on where there's been the odd bit. You're like, no, just that needs to go bye-bye, and just get rid of it.
Yeah. Well, listen.
The example, baseball game.
A different story. Yeah, little things are always, yeah, right, exactly. Little things can go. Sentences here and there, little things. But when you ask the question, all right, so let me reiterate. I thought we were talking big pieces. When you're cutting out big sections. Yeah, big sections are a different story. You can just remove little things here and there. I'm not saying that if you cut 2 sentences, you have to replace it with 1 small sentence. No. But if you're cutting paragraphs or pages, yeah, you want to look at how do we re-segue from where it left off to where I'm now going to restart and try to make that flow properly. Little stuff you can just plain cut. Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, if you've got the big stuff, you have to go back to your plot. You have to go back to a synopsis of some description, which I call an editorial synopsis. And I think that is what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Now, here's a question that has just come through since we're on the same sort of thing. Have you ever asked a writer to take an entire act out of their manuscript and write it again?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I have. Yeah.
Those
calls are always about as fun as you'd imagine, for me and for the author. It's not fun. No one likes to hear, hey, I'm going to need you to redo the whole final act. No one likes that. I don't think any editor likes having to say it. Generally, that only happens if someone hires me when the writing is done and I now have to come in and edit. That generally does not happen if they hire me while they're still writing to sort of be there as a sounding board and to look at things. Hopefully that should not happen. Like, if your editor is weighing in as you're going, ideally you'll never have like, hey, by the way, let's cut and redo that whole last act. Like, where were you when I was, no. But absolutely I have. No, they're not thrilled about it. I'll tell you what, there's been a lot of times I get a book that I'm working on with someone that I wasn't at all involved during the writing process, but I've come back and said, I don't get the ending. And that, I don't just mean like the last 5 pages. We're talking the last 150 pages. I don't understand. What are we doing? Why does it end here? Why, you know, and so there, you have to have these heart-to-heart conversations about that. That's where the trust comes in with your editor, right? But I had a client who, can't say a lot, but he had a really great ending that I came back and I kept telling him, hey, punch this up, do this. And God bless him, he listened, and he finally got it to where I was like, hey, this is pretty good. But, you know, on second thought, I'm not sure it ends in the right spot. And he's like, well, you know, what do you mean? So we talked about it, and it was their agent who kind of weighed in and said, I don't like the location. Can you put that halfway across the world and rewrite the whole thing? And it wasn't as simple as, and I can't give it all away, I'm being really vague, I know, and that makes it tough, but it sort of involved an event exclusive to where he had originally put the ending. So there's no way to just like, oh, by the way, this happened here. Didn't work at all. Had to fully come up with a whole new final act. That was pretty recent. But I will say this, when it was done, it was infinitely better.
Yeah, that's the trust. And that's really what it comes down to. An editor, especially the developmental editors, which is both you and myself, we know stories. We know the mechanisms. We can see how they work. But we're trying to part that knowledge onto the writer,
right.
and it doesn't always work.
Yeah, no, it doesn't. And no one's ever happy to hear, oh, you want me to do like a huge rewrite? Great. No one loves that. I don't blame them. That's not what you want to hear.
No, so a local writer here in New Zealand, Soraya Lane, she was telling us once how her editor actually told her to kill off one of the characters in her manuscript. She's like, what? No! And she did it because she trusted her editor. Thank you. And her book went to #1 because of it.
It's so funny because I'm always on the reverse end of that. I'm always like, why are we killing them off? We can use them in another book. Just save them, you know? I'm always trying to talk to people like, don't kill them off. What are you doing? We can use them in the next one. There's 2 books down the road in your series. Let's bring them back. World building. Don't kill everybody. Yeah, that's funny because I'm always the opposite on that.
That's funny. All right, so
except for bad guys, by the way. I always like when the bad, especially in a thriller, you want the bad guy to get theirs. So my favorite author, Vince Flynn, his books are very linear. Essentially, when you open them, you meet the bad guy, you know who the hero is, Mitch Rapp, and I'm not gonna lie to you, for 400 pages, kind of what propels you forward is every time the bad guy does something and he acts like he's getting away with it, you're like, you're not getting away with it. Mitch Rapp is coming. I don't know when, I don't know where, but he's coming. You're definitely gonna die. I don't know how that's gonna happen, but I can't wait to find out because you hate the bad guy so much. So yeah, with bad guys, I do that with a lot of my clients. They're like, well, the bad guy's going to get away and I'm going to use him down the road. I'm like, what are you talking about? Have your hero smoke this dude. That's what readers want. You want the bad guys to, you know, come to their demise in the end.
You want to give them comeuppance. We're going down.
You do. You really do. Yeah.
All right. So we're talking about endings. So Janie has asked, what are some of the tips for tying up all of those loose ends? And I'm going to add on to this. Do you actually have to tie up the loose ends?
No, you don't. So you want to tie up your main threads, enough of them to satisfy the reader. This is one of those answers that, by the way, is really tough to answer. Like, I don't think anyone's going to be satisfied with the answer that I would have, or even you. It totally is going to matter on the story. You have to see the threads to know which ones to tie up. But no, you do not need to tie them all up. You want to tie up enough to satisfy the reader, but also leave enough open to make them buy the next book. You know, that's a big, if you're having a series, that's a big part of it. If it's a standalone, yes, try to tie up as much as you can.
But sometimes the tying it up is not what works. If I sit down and I think it was called Stranger. I think it was Stranger, but it was a Dean Coots book. And all the way through to the end, you had these people, they were at some sort of hotel or a motel or something like that, and then right that last chapter, it was all what the various different people were doing in their lives when after the world had finished and after the story was done. And I'm like, I don't care.
Yeah,
I really don't care. Why are you giving me this information? The story had concluded when they left the motel.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, sometimes you can tie up too much loose ends.
Absolutely.
Dean Coots is one of the really bad ones for doing that.
And that's why every project is different. Every writing project is different. You have, as an editor, you have to see it. That's a hard, That's why I said it's a hard question to answer. But generally speaking, in broad strokes, you want to answer more of those threads in a standalone than a series book. That's just a general answer to that. But there's always exceptions, like always.
Cool. All right, so let's talk about the next step. So we've written our manuscript. It is complete. Now what? What do we do?
Well, first of all, go celebrate, take a day off. Most people never get there. When you type the end, you should absolutely celebrate that. Most people never get that far. So that in of itself is an achievement. Now the real work begins. That's the problem. So you type the end, you've gone through after the edit and all that. Next steps as far as finding an agent, is that what you're asking?
I'm thinking about, you're not quite to the agent. We're not quite to the publishing stage. I'm just thinking about you finished the completed draft. You're not necessarily on a first draft. You might be on a second or a third draft, but it's finished. I would say first step is obviously take a break.
Yeah, because when you come back with fresh eyes, you'll always. So here's the problem: when you're writing what you read, your brain's gonna read it the way you meant to write it. So you'll miss things. You'll even have dialogue wrong, but you'll read it to yourself the way you meant to write it. You take 2 weeks off and come back, you see it for what it is. That's the most beneficial thing for me as a writer. I do that all the time. So I'm like really bad with my own dialogue. I'll miss a word here or there, but I don't notice it. If I take like 2 weeks off, I come back, I'm like, what was I trying to say here? I don't even remember what the character was saying. Oh yeah, and then you can like fix it. Yeah, fresh eyes on your own work is the most beneficial thing, definitely. Get fresh eyes, go back in.
Okay, so now here's another questions about this is critique partners, beta readers. I'm not sure if you could answer this question. I mean, I could, but where would you find critique partners? How do you go about organizing critique partners for your manuscript?
No idea. Other than
I had a feeling you were going to say that.
Most of my clients are, established writers that are doing really well and they're published and they give it to their buddies. I can't name names. I would, but I can't. They would not be thrilled. But they rely on each other. I know right now, like two authors in Tennessee that are good buddies and they bounce their stuff off of each other and they're both working on a very prominent series. That happens all the time. Writers go to other writer friends, through conferences and coming up together, working in the same industry. You become friends with different authors. At a level before you're an author, how do you find those people? I honest to God have no clue. I know you.
I can answer that. That one I can answer. So basically, if you're looking for critique partners, there's a variety of different avenues you can try. You can try the CP matchup, which can sometimes happen on Twitter. There is some other, on Facebook, I think it's called Subject Club Manuscript Matchup or Subject Club Critique Partners or something like that. It's a Subject Club one. They do manuscript matchups. I know Sisters in Crime. So if you're a member of Sisters in Crime, particularly the Guppies chapter, there is a manuscript matchup that they will do every so often as well. So there are ways of finding critique partners. It basically comes down to just taking the risk. And then it's what I call critique partner dating, because it's like finding your mate for life. You have to make sure that the two of you gel. And if you don't, then it's actually going to do more harm than good on your manuscript. And I can speak.
I would think so. Like, yeah, so I specialize in thrills and mysteries. Go ahead and send me your nonfiction book about World War II. I'll critique that for you. That's probably not the right person. I would imagine that it's very much like dating, finding someone that has similar interest and taste in books to give you a clean assessment. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not just, you might have a clean assessment. So like there's a manuscript that I started to draft and it lasted about 3 or 4 months. And then it found a metaphorical drawer because the critique partner I was working with, he didn't understand my character and kept telling me that women wouldn't be as snarky and talk back to cops the way my character does. And yes, this is the one that you love so much, Ryan. And I was like, dude, you clearly have never met me because I would talk that way. So yeah, I had to sever ties, but unfortunately the damage was already done to that manuscript because I was trying to make this guy happy and it wasn't working.
Yeah,
So,
look, I'm biased, but I would say get an editor that you really trust and run it through them. Yeah.
okay, so that's my next question. Developmental editor. Would you recommend a developmental editor for all writers? Would you say?
Yes. If you can afford it, yes. Yes.
And there's the
Because
caveat.
it will make you better. Anytime you get professional eyes on it, whether it's me or you or someone else that really specializes in this, it's going to push you and make you better. So yeah, if you can afford it, absolutely.
Yeah, and that's the caveat, if you can afford it.
Yeah.
Because it is not cheap. Trust me.
Yeah.
I'm sitting here going, how am I going to be able to afford another manuscript for Ryan to do?
I know I'm spoiled because my agent has to read my stuff, and he just so happened to have been an editor, very successful editor. So I'm spoiled. I'm for sure not hiring a competitor. I get asked, some people all the time that like, if my schedule's too busy or they can't afford it, whatever, they're like, hey, can you recommend someone else? And I'm like, no, I have no idea. I don't know my competitors very well.
Sorry.
Yes, Judy, we're not competitors, we're friends. So I would say if you can afford it, but there's the caveat of can you afford it? Also, though, you get what you pay for. So I've had a lot of writers come to me and they hire me like, look, you were a lot more expensive than my last editor. And I'm like, well, I don't know why, I don't know who they are. Never heard of them. What do they do? Do they have a good resume? And then we end up working together and they come back and I'm always flattered, but it's always like, oh, I get why you cost more. I mean, I hope so. You never want anyone to walk away like they were for sure not worth it, but you get what you pay for. Generally in life, that's true. If there's an editor and the price is too good to be true, it almost for sure is. Just keep that in mind. Yeah.
Especially if they're doing developmental editing, because developmental editing is one of the more expensive forms of editing. So
there's a lot of work that goes into that. I mean, you're looking at every element of the overall manuscript, every facet of it. And then you're not only, okay, here's what's wrong, you're trying to help fix it. And a lot of times if you're working with a new writer, your mentor, you're trying to teach them. If I come back and I tell a writer, hey, I would like you to use more narrative context here to explain this, they might come back and go, I'm sorry, what is narrative context? Or how do I do this? Or how do I do that? They don't always, if I'm like, hey, you didn't set the scene properly here. How do you set a scene properly? Well, those are things you need to know. Your editor should know them. Your editor should be able to explain that to you at no additional cost as part of their fee. And if they don't, those would be some red flags I would have for sure. Someone that just throws a little red ink on your document and emails it back to you is not what you want. So it's not always about the best value. You really want someone that you can trust that, can get eyes on this thing and help you make it better.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than getting a report that says these big fancy words and you're like, so what? I need a dictionary just to understand what you just wrote.
Or the lazy editor. They're like, no, everything's good. You're good to go. You don't need to do anything. And you're like, thanks. Glad I spent all that money to be told it was fine just the way it is when it's not, So yeah, you definitely want to go with someone that's reputable, that has a good reputation and a good resume.
Yeah. And there is some other things with that. You just have to just interview them. Interview. All right. So for those who are heading down, say, traditional publication roads, would you recommend that they hire a copy editor?
Yes, but a lot of the best developmental line editors are going to clean that document when they go through it. Like, I do. So my style is like, look, if there's a comma that needs to be moved, we're going to move it. If there's a typo, I'm going to fix that. I want the cleanest draft possible. A lot of the best developmental editors should have either copy editing ability that they'll do or someone on retainer to handle that. If you are past all the editing as far as developmental, your story and everything like that, is it worth copy editing to send to an agent? My answer is going to surprise you, but it's no. It's absolutely not worth it. I've never met an agent ever, and I know a lot of them, who's ever rejected someone because of typos. Not once.
And if they do reject you because of a typo, I'm sorry, they're not the agent for you.
No, they're really not. They're really not. No, they're not. I've never in my life met an agent or talked to an agent who said they rejected people for typos. Yeah.
It's just not something, because typos happen.
You have to understand, a lot of publishers are going to put 3 copy editors on that manuscript before it comes out and is an actual book in book form. There's still typos.
Yeah.
You know, how
yeah.
often do you go to the bookstore and you pick something up? You're like, how did this make it out there like that? Think of how many eyeballs that thing went past. That went through your developmental editor, that went through the author, probably their agent, and then at least 3 copy editors, and that typo is still there. So the idea that you'll hire someone and put a little money into it and that you're gonna have no typos, no, that doesn't exist. Make it the cleanest you possibly can. Hopefully, if you have a developmental editor, they're gonna clean it up with you. And then I say you're probably ready to query.
Yeah, probably, possibly. Okay. Self-publishing and traditional. Everyone needs an editor?
Yes. The people self-pubbing need an editor far more than the people publishing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, because those who are going through the traditional publications, as you just said, you get an editor when you're going to the publishing house.
You get a lot of editors. If you have an editor assigned to you, that's going to be your developmental editor. They're your acquisition editor. Whoever buys that's going to oversee it. So why do freelance? So like, why do I still work with published authors? It's the dirty secret in publishing. They want to send their publisher the cleanest book they possibly can, right? So that's why there's still freelance opportunities there. But if you don't have a publisher to oversee these things, to put editors on it and run it through 3 copy edits and everything else, you definitely need an editor before that thing goes out into the wild and you're self-pubbing it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Okay, so what can writers expect when they're working with an editor? And not just you, not just me, but what can they expect? What are some of the things they can expect?
To get better. You know, a lot of conversations about their book. A lot of answering questions about why did you do this? Why are you doing that? What if you did this? What if you did that? And a lengthy process, you know, probably, yeah, so a lengthy process. So I think a lot of writers think this is like a 1-week process. It is definitely not. If there's a writer or an editor and you pay good money, you're spending thousands of dollars and they're like, I'll have it done in 2 weeks. I wouldn't want that deal. I mean, think of how much you're paying them per hour then. As you know, and especially recently, because I was sick and my schedule really was turned upside down. This is a lengthy process. As a writer, I want it to take longer. When my agent's like, hey, I read the whole thing last night, I'm like, can you spend 6 more days reading it, please? Because I really want to make sure you know what, you know, everything in there. I don't want someone who's just going to give it back to me the fastest they possibly can. I don't think quicker is better at all in the editing process. When I work with someone new for the first time, there's so much that goes into that. I take notes on your writing. I got to know everything from your word choice to your cadence, sentence structure. I have to learn your prose. Then I have to learn your story, your characters, everything else. It is not as simple as like, hey, I'll read this once. I'll start the edit. You'll have it back in 2 weeks. That's something to look out for. Any editor who's like, yeah, I'll have it back to you in no time. I would want to know why. Why can they have it back to you so quickly, frankly? Yeah.
And then you come across writers like me that because you've got 2 of my manuscripts that you've worked with and the voices are completely different.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, totally. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and they're different genres. So they're very different. Yeah. So the biggest thing is it takes time. Don't rush your editor. I mean, obviously they're falling off the grid and stuff like that. Yeah, you want updates and to know where you're at and all that. There should always be communication as needed. As you know, I like to let my authors breathe because nothing irritates me more than like if my agent is calling me for updates. If I'm writing something, I'm like, listen, it'll be done when it's done. You know, I don't know when it'll be done. I don't like to put deadlines, self-imposed deadlines. I'm not big on those, but that's me as a writer. With an editor and the author, I try to leave my authors alone, but the second they need something or they want an update or they want to talk, make sure you can get to your editor, definitely. But don't expect nor necessarily root for this really quick turnaround because, listen, yeah. I mean, quicker is not better a lot of the time on some of this stuff at all.
Okay, I'm going to ask this question because the last time we did Ask an Editor, a question came from an anonymous source, and I'm not exactly sure which one of the lovely people around asked this question, but it was asked of me, and I can pretty much guess what your response is going to be. It's that a writer was working with a professional editor, and I have to stress the word professional because
I love that.
The response they got, your writing sucks and you should give up on writing and find a different hobby.
Oh, I'd be furious. So here's my answer to that, okay? When you're the editor, you are paid to fix it. You're like a mechanic. Your job is to fix this, not tell someone this is terrible, can't do it. That's your job. Your job is to fix that. I'm paid to fix it, whether it's good or bad. There's jobs that are much easier than jobs that are they take a lot, okay? It's a lot of late nights in the office as an editor because you're like, dear God, how do I fix this? There is so much to fix here. It's your job. Your editor should be fixing it. Your editor, I didn't hire you to tell me like, you don't go to the doctor just to be told like, yeah, you're really sick. Like, thank you. Fix me, make it better. You know what I mean? I'm gonna expect a prescription or two here. Run a test, something, fix me. Yeah, no, I would be furious if an editor came back and was like, hey, nope, you're terrible. You shouldn't write at all. I think they're a terrible editor then.
Yeah, it was a case of when I first got asked that question, it's like, tell me who they were, let me at them.
That's how I feel. I mean, they're obviously a terrible editor if they can't fix it. I have seen, just so you know, I've seen some really bad stuff, really bad, that took a long time to fix that ended up doing well.
Yeah, I think what I see it at that time is that everyone can tell a story. A 6-year-old can tell a story. Is it a story that is publishable? Probably not. Not coming from a 6-year-old, but they can learn the skills.
Absolutely. Someone hires me, I will do everything I possibly can. And I think you know this, but you don't require a lot of that because you're a really good writer. But I'll do everything I possibly can to help that person. Now, sometimes it's not fun for me or you, and we're going to have to get on Zoom a lot. And I'm going to have to like break down like, no, you can't do that. Here's why. I'm sorry. Your prologue can't be 90 pages long. I've seen that, by the way. That is true. I'm not even kidding.
90 pages?
Yeah,
oh
I'm not kidding.
God.
And the writer's like, well, I really like that. It's unique. And I'm like, no, listen, no one else has done that for a reason because it's a really bad idea. Okay. Like, don't do that. And so if you're receptive to learning, yeah, your editor should be able to help teach you. A freelance editor for sure. Now, publishing, no. You get traditional publish from a big 5, it's going to be big 4 now. They're not going to hold your hand at all. And that's the other reason why sometimes freelance like me, we get hired to come in and decipher what the publisher wants because they are brutal.
Yeah, I think that was my first contract actually, is that I had an editorial report that came in from, so a client came to me with an editorial report. She didn't understand a single word of it. And she just went, what does this mean? And so I was hired to help her understand it. And of course,
and you can understand the panic from a writer's perspective because you just signed this contract. You're on cloud 9. I'm about to be a published author. Then your dreams are crushed and you're afraid, like, am I going to give the money back? Am my deal going to be canceled? What do I? Yeah, absolutely. It can. Listen, getting an edit back is never fun, but at least when you're hiring the person and you're paying them, you should get your money's worth. But remember, a publisher's paying you. And they are absolutely ruthless. I mean, they're nice and all that. Don't get me wrong. I'm friends with a lot of editors with different publishers. They don't hold your hand at all. They expect you to come in and be a professional. Here's the edit. Fix this. Get it back to me. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. Which means you have to know, which again is where the trust comes in. You have to.
Absolutely.
You have to trust enough, but at the same time, you have to be able to feel confident enough, or at least you can correct me if I'm wrong, but you have to be able to feel confident enough to go, dude, I don't understand what you meant by this particular line. Yeah. Can you just explain this terminology for me, please?
I do it all the time. I probably did it with you and would probably tell you I do that all the time. Like, what was this? Why is this here? I ask the question a lot as an editor. What's the purpose of this chapter? And I think that freaks out writers. Like, could you not read it? It's pretty clear. You know, the character had to go from A to B, so they had to get on the airplane and this and that. And I'm like, no, back up. What's the point of this chapter? Why can't that just be written in 3 sentences, a summary in the next chapter? Why do I have to see them get on the airplane and go from A to B? Am I missing something? Because if there's a character development issue, or you're trying to introduce a character, or you're trying to plant a clue for later, I need that. So sometimes I think writers they don't know what to make of that. I'll come back and say, hey, what's the point of this? And they're like, oh, I don't know. Obviously, they're getting from here to there, or, I mean, I don't know. Apparently, there's no point. And I don't mean it like that. I'm not trying to like be offensive or abrasive. It's like, I just want to understand, do we need this? Do I have to see this? Or can this be recapped? You know? And so there has to be a level of trust and open dialogue with the people working together to get straight answers. That's how you get there.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than not having an understanding, or just making an assumption that an editor's asked you to do one thing and it was your understanding was completely wrong.
Yeah.
You need to get that clarification. You need to have that opportunity to ask questions. So
Yeah.
I think that's the perfect time to just, if anybody's got any questions about writing and editing, because we're gonna move into the publication side very shortly. But if you've got any questions about the writing or editing side of things, drop it into the Zoom chat, and somebody will go through and hopefully fill them up. I can see some of them, and we are getting some of this. So okay, so Liz has asked, what are some of the things that you wish writers knew when handing them the manuscript to you? What are some of the things that you wish they did or they knew about first?
Well, I could go on and on about. There's a lot I wish they knew.
Oh, okay, that was a can of worms. Oops.
Yeah, a lot. Listen, I mean, if we want to bring Liz in and ask her more specifically what she means, but so I want them to understand it takes time. Definitely, that we're your ally. You should know that we're trying to work together, but know that you also have the freedom to say no. You're the boss. The writer's the boss. Writer, you can come back as an editor and go, I want you to do this, 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 and this. You have the right to say no. It is your material. It is not an agent's. It's not a freelance editor. It's not the publisher's. That is yours. You have the right to say no.
Yeah, even in a traditional, I can say that because
absolutely.
So there was
all the time.
Yeah, it happened to me as well. So I had it was one of the chapters that I have in Putting the Science in Fiction, and I got the notes back from the copy editor, and there was this whole thing. The chapter itself was about imaging over long distances, and I created a short little snippet story about how the spy was going to be found by the satellite, and oh no, you better run! Ah! But of course, the original line said, "Run, Jason Bourne, run," and the editor said, "Delete." And I went back and said, no, because it destroyed the story flow. But I did sit down and I took a look and going, okay, they want me to delete this. Is it possible that the reason they want me to delete this is not because of the line, but because of the Jason Bourne reference? Could it be just this copyright thing? And so I changed the line to "Run, Sly Spy, run," and that's the version that's in the final manuscript. So I'm of that frame of mind that an editor will tell you to do something. They will give you a recommendation, but it's not necessarily the correct diagnosis of the problem.
Absolutely. And I will add, one more thing I wish that writers knew. Our job is to come out and point the things that need to be fixed. Just like if you say to a mechanic, hey, what's wrong on my car? They're not going to come back and go, hey, your brakes are great. They're going to tell you what's wrong. So I've worked with some new clients sometimes, and I'll hand back and I'll say, here's the stuff we got to fix. And they're like, wow, this is a lot. Is there anything you liked about the story? And I'll say, like, everything I didn't point out in the editorial stuff. Yeah, everything else was fine. We're not trying to fix good stuff. It's already fixed. It's good to go. Sometimes I wish that newer authors embarking on their first professional edit did know that.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You've been there. It happens all the time.
Yeah.
I was like, did you like anything? You're like, yeah, everything not in red ink I liked a lot. That was good.
Yeah, when it's bleeding with red, you're like, oh my God, what did I do wrong? Oh my God.
I've been there too.
All right, so we have another question here. Now, the question says, any tips for maintaining tense in story? Now, I'm just going to ask for a very quick clarification from Liz, who's asked the question. Are you talking about past or present tense, or are you talking the tension? Because if you're talking past and present tense, there really shouldn't be issues with maintaining.
Yeah, you can't mess that up. You got to pick one and stick to it, because you'll see that all the time. Look, it happens all the time. I'll say to an author, so is this supposed to be past or present? Like, it's past, which, like, overwhelming majority of fiction is third person past tense, right? And I'll say, okay, well, there's a lot of present tense. They're like, there is? I didn't even know. That happens all the time. We can fix that. But if you're purposely mix and matching, don't do that.
Yeah, I think, okay, so when you're talking about present tense, it's very common to see present tense in YA, young adult. Very common to see it.
Yeah.
And if you're talking present tense and you are swapping to past tense, because there are instances within the narrative that will happen, but in those instances, your characters are reflecting on a moment that happened in the past. So it's like a flashback. It is
Absolutely.
something that's happening in the past. But if it's happening in the right there, right now, then it should be in present tense in the story. But if you're writing in past tense, then everything should be in past tense. There should
And
never be
one more
this
tip for
flip.
that. If you're writing third person past tense and you're writing internal dialogue, that should be first person present tense. That's how we think. When something happens and I think, you know, I need to get out of the house right now, that's how you think. You don't think, you know, I should have gotten out of the house. No, it's real. It's happening now. So even when you're in third person past tense in your narrative, if you're going to do internal dialogue, that is first person present.
Yeah. All right. So we now have another question here from Im. She's asked, at what point in the manuscript journey would you recommend that a new writer approach a professional editor?
Oh, I can only speak to me. The sooner the better, because we're going to save a lot of rewrites that way. That's, for me, the sooner the better, because I would want to see it up front, look for red flags, talk to you. Even if it's like, hey, I'm putting you on retainer. Can we talk about this as I'm writing it? Yes. Because if they're like, hey, it starts like this, and you're writing a mystery novel, and then they're like, it just goes off the rails. You can tell that as an editor, right? You're like, whoa, and then what happened? Yeah, no, let's not do that. And then you're going to help try to fix it before they write it. Or they send you, like, it's pretty common if you have an editor already on board, they might send you the first 100 pages or every 100 pages as they go. You can't really start editing till the whole thing's done. But again, you're looking for red flags. You can sort of sign off on them and go, yep, these 100 are good enough. Keep going. You know, so for me, the sooner the better. That doesn't always have to be. Once you're really comfortable. So if you don't want to hire someone up front, I prefer it because I don't charge extra for that. I'm like never going to charge someone extra to work with them as they're writing because it's going to save me time later. I'd much rather be involved sooner. If someone pays more, that might be cost more to do that. That might be a different factor. But generally, if you don't want to go that route, once you're truly comfortable and you feel like you've given it everything you have and you've looked over it and you're happy with your writing, that's when you go.
Yeah, I think that's the philosophy I think I've taken with you, is that I've took my own personal manuscripts to as far as I could take them on my own. And I knew they needed help, and I needed that other eye to push me and to push it to that next level. And I think that is the difference. But that's also me being a control freak.
Yeah, no, listen. Yeah. Listen, and by the way, I can see these questions too just now because I accidentally clicked a button, so they just popped up for me. And I see the next one. If you're writing a sequel, should you wait until you edit before you dive into the so I get what she's saying. So if I finished book 1, but this is going to be a series, do I wait for you to edit before I write book 2? No, because it's going to take a long time to get through the edit. Don't sit around and do nothing. Start working on it. The other advantage to that is if we land an agent, then at that point, you're already ahead. Your agent's not going, so what comes next, and how do I explain this to a publisher? You're sitting on something that's probably book 2. You're getting to work on it. You're getting ahead of yourself. There's a saying in publishing, you have your whole life to write your first book. You have 1 year to write your second. So if you don't know what that means you can spend 10 years writing your first book. But if you sign a 2-book deal, they want the next book in 1 year. Clock's running. So get ahead if you can. If your goal is to go traditional and all that, try to get ahead as far as you can.
Yeah, I also look at it from the point of view, if you're writing a series, you need to sometimes actually write what's going to happen in the subsequent books because you need to foreshadow it in the first book.
Absolutely.
Especially if it's a continuation of story type series.
Absolutely.
If it's a type of series where you're just using the same characters and you're just building the character arc a little bit, but they're different stories, then yeah, you can get away with not actually writing the sequels. But if it's a continuation of that story, you need to know what's going on.
Yep, you really do. Because the other thing is you might have to go back and say, do I need to add anything into book one to bridge this. Yeah. Definitely
Yeah.
don't sit with. By the way, I didn't mean to steal your job, Judy, but I clicked and they popped up, and I was very excited that they were there. So I ran with that.
That's okay. No, that's cool. That's fine. All right. So there's another one here that you didn't see. You probably propped it up a little bit too early.
No, I see it now, but I didn't want to keep doing it. I just figured I'll let you do it.
Okay. So should a writer look at that first manuscript and publishing it and just rewriting it, or do they just use it as a learning experience?
I would never want to spend the amount of time it takes generally to write a first draft as a learning experience. I would definitely pursue, if you're happy with it, if you think it's good, if you're happy and you think there's something to it, I would pursue it. Absolutely. I would not think, okay, I did my first one, I'll put that in the drawer, now let me get serious about this. To me, that's probably a year of your life potentially wasted then. I get that, believe it or not, there's a lot of writers that do that. But I wouldn't personally do it.
Yeah, I know for me, I've got my first manuscript is sitting in that metaphorical drawer and it's sitting there, but there is a reason it's sitting in the metaphorical drawer. It has nothing to do with the fact that I don't think it's publishable or anything, because I think it is. It's just, it's a behemoth series that I know I have to plot out that entire series before I can even look at that first book again, because it's just a behemoth of a thing. But that was just what I created, and that's why it's sitting in the metaphorical drawer. So it's not necessarily a bad thing. Okay, I'll draft.
I love Bree's question, by the way, and I love the name Bree. I have a Bree character in the series that my agent is shopping.
So Bree's question, we'll read it out. So Bree's question, if you're writing a series, is it okay to leave your main character at the lowest point at the end of the first book?
Yes. Yes. Because here's why. If it's a series character, you have to have somewhere to go with them. I mean, whether you have to redeem them or heal them or bring them back, you have to have some area of growth to take the character that's going to make the reader want to pick up the next book. Yeah.
The other way of looking at this is, so K.M. Wellen, she talks about character arcs, and most books are positive arcs where the character has gone from a low point to a high point. But then you'll come across your traditional thriller character tends to have a flat arc where their ethos, they haven't changed. The character themselves haven't changed. The world's changed around them, but the character hasn't. Yep. And then you have the negative arc. And the most classic negative arc is actually Darth Vader, Star Wars.
Sure.
Anakin Skywalker. He goes from a positive point to a negative point. It's a classic negative arc. And leaving characters in those negative arcs just make you want to go, ooh.
Yeah, and what happens
Where are
next?
they going to go? So,
absolutely.
Yeah, perfectly good. Okay, so let's move on to some of these other publication sort of things. So this is getting probably a bit interesting because I know you work with a lot of traditional writers, but with the way the publishing has gone with the traditional publishing, is it worth debut writers going down traditional? Are traditional publishers even seeking debut writers now?
Yeah, I mean, look, that's the $1 million question. So I always think it's absolutely always worth it. It's always worth it. Let's get that out of the way. You can't hit the home run if you don't swing. You know, your odds of getting published are not always great, but your odds of getting published are zero if you don't try to get it out there. You know what I mean? No one's going to call you and go, I work for Penguin. I heard you might have a manuscript. Can I please read that? That will never happen, ever. So unless you're actively trying to get it out there and trying to get it published, it's not going to happen. So forget about the odds, forget about everything else. Yes, if you believe in it and you're happy with your work, it's absolutely worth pursuing it. I would say always pursue it before you ever consider self-publishing. Now, that said, the $1 million question, are publishers looking for it right now? Of course, publishers are always looking for good manuscripts. What kind? Where is the market at? We're all trying to find out. I can't tell you how much I've been on the phone since January 1st. Everyone has that question. Where is the market? What is selling? Thrillers had cooled down pretty recently. I think that was, I can tell you that for sure. Mystery crime was pretty hot for a while. Is it going to come back around? Does that stay the same? Is there going to be another shift? Not 100% sure about that. But just because publishers are looking for really great crime novels does not mean that if they get a really great thriller, they're going to pass. No major publisher is going, I'm only buying crime thrillers. If you knock their socks off with the thriller, they're going to buy it and they're going to publish it.
Yeah, the other side of that is that traditional publishers are always looking for new people because they have to publish new material. They have to.
Yeah.
They may publish their the writers that they've been working with and publish new material from them because it is a bit more of a guaranteed sell. But eventually those people are going to run dry with ideas. They'll either stop writing.
It's always a guaranteed sale. Look, I mean, when Harlan Coben puts out books, they're never like, well, he's probably going to run out of ideas soon. They always want the next one. The problem is he's only going to do one book a year. They need a publishing schedule. They really do. And there's a heavy turnover. Authors that try to make it and then they don't, or for whatever reason, you know, they leave the world of publishing and go back to whatever else they were doing before that. There's always going to be room for new writers at the major publishers, always, because they want to grow stars. It's a lot like, you know, athletic teams, professional sports. They're never going to go, nope, we're good enough. We got everybody we need. Like you always are like, eventually we're going to need more talent. So they're always looking for that. That's the biggest thing. Just know that they're always looking for real talent, whatever genre you're writing in. If it's good, you can get a sale, bottom line. And they need new authors every year to fill out their publishing schedule.
Okay. So what are your views about those writers who seek a hybrid method? So where some things are self-published, but some things are traditionally published. What are your views on that?
Tough. You don't see a lot of successful people with major publishers publishing series and self-publishing others. That's tough. Yeah.
I think James Scott Bell is one of the few that I see
but
that has done it.
How many people can you name that have had success doing that?
James Scott Bell?
Exactly. So it's not a ton. So yeah, no. I really always push and recommend, and you know this, but like if people work with me, I want to be involved in the query letter and recommending agents and stuff like that. I'm always going to push, let's try to go the traditional route. The self-publishing route is always there if you need it. Where I actually see value in it is, so you sign for a series and your publisher wants that, but you really want to write this other book, but they're not interested in it. Guess what? You can write the sequel and the third book, the fourth book, whatever, keep going, and then write your passion project and just self-publish that if you want. So I think there's some value there, but no, generally there's not a lot of overlap. You're traditionally published or you're self-published, and it's one or the other.
It's quite funny because I don't think Ryan knows that I'm a hybrid.
It's not common though, you know what I mean? It's not super common.
But my hybrid, my self-published is nonfiction. And it is because I don't have the time. I'm talking about technology and the advances in technology and where technology has come, especially when I'm talking about social media. And I don't have time to be dealing with the waiting for the traditional path. Your publisher, you may, from the point you sign the contract, it's 2 years before it sees the shelf. And when you start talking about technology, it changes.
And that's absolutely true, but there's a reason it takes 2 years. It's not that they're lazy and they're just letting it sit there. They honestly, if you sign a traditional publishing contract and they're rushing the book out, you're not setting up for success. The marketing that they do, the way that they roll out their publishing schedule, they're planning marketing and publicity 6-12 months out. It takes time. So they want to have plenty of time to edit you, focus on you, give you attention, plan your marketing and publicity, everything that you're going to need to have a successful launch. That's why it takes time. That's not always doable for the writer when it's a hot button issue. I've seen it with Joel C. Rosenberg. He was actually the first author to ever talk about ISIS in a book. And he wrote this book about it, and his editor at the time at Tyndale House Publishing was like, why ISIS? Pick someone else. Just fictionalize someone. No one knows who they are. And he was like, I think they're gonna though. I really do. Guess what? That book was supposed to come out like halfway into the next year when people knew what ISIS was. and they couldn't print it fast enough. They fast-tracked that thing, you know? So there's always exceptions. And certainly if you have a timely thing, yeah, you want to get it out as fast as you can. But just understand, like when you sign a publishing contract, your publishers aren't the bad guys that don't want to wait 18 months. Believe it or not, they're trying to do it to set you up for success. And that, by the way, goes into, I'm going to do your job again. But
okay, do my job. Go for it. No, yeah.
You sign a
Because I'm
traditional,
sitting here seeing that question myself. I'm like, ooh.
yeah, traditional published contract. Are you signing off your work and you lose the rights? No, you're still the boss. You still own it. So you own the copyright on it. It's still yours. They only earn the right to publish it.
Yeah, in fact, with U.S. copyright laws, they have to register your copyright in your name.
Absolutely.
It's you that owns the rights to that book.
Now they will own the publishing rights. That's an important thing to remember. Talk to your agent about. Go over all those things. But no, you're still the boss. You can still come back to a publisher and say, no, I'm not going to do that with this book. I'm going to write this. You're still the boss. I'm not saying there won't be pushback and it won't get heated maybe. Probably they'll call your agent and say, you need to talk to your writer, you know, this and that. And then your agent's in the middle of it. But that's, I always say, throw your agent in them. That's literally what they're getting paid for. Make them do that. Don't handle that. Make your agent be the bad guy. And you just tell your publisher, yeah, I'll try to find a way to do that. And your agent comes back and says, I'm not going to do it. You are not signing off your rights to your stuff. Like the way I've heard that. Some people are like, well, I'm going to self-publish because I want to own it. Well, okay, you'll still own it. Literally, they're paying you to be able to publish your work.
What the publishing house owns in terms of the copyright is actually the package. So they own the copyright of how the book is formatted, how the cover looks, how that blurb, they own the copyright on the full package, but you own the copyright of the internal material. So, and it's the internal material that makes the book. Without it, they don't have a book. So now there's a question here that Gwen has, and you're not going to be able to answer this one, Ryan, so I will just answer it. Does New Zealand do the same? New Zealand copyright laws are written in such a way that the moment that manuscript or the moment anything finds a tangible format, and that includes if you've written it into your computer, it is covered under copyright laws. End of story. You do not register your copyright with any registration body. That is a problem when you are dealing with US companies, because the likes of Amazon, all it takes is some bleep, and trust me, that is the best word for them, to actually approach Amazon and say that actually you are in infringement of their copyright. And because New Zealand doesn't have a formal copyright registration process, the ownership of that becomes onto you. So for those who are New Zealanders, my recommendation is to actually use I'll put a note on this in the liner notes, but it's the copyright index or something like that. It's the one I use, and I think I paid $90 or $100 for the service. And that's it. And I load my manuscripts up to this service, the ones that are going to be published, not the ones that Ryan's working with, because there's no point in copywriting anything until it's actually getting ready to actually go for publication. And that's the last thing you want to do. You don't want to go to an agent saying, oh, I've already copyrighted. No, don't do that. No, don't do that. But if you put up, I think it's the copyright index, I'll definitely put it in the liner notes. You load your manuscript up to the service, and then it sends you a certificate that's dated and stamped what it is, and it has an access registration. So if there is a copyright infringement at any point in time and somebody says, oh, you need to prove, well, you can send them this link which has got dated information as to when it was uploaded to the service along with whatever you're registering, and it's proof. Yeah. Oh, thank you very much. Anne's just come through and said it's copyrightindex.com. Again, I'll put the information in the liner notes. But that's a New Zealand quirky thing. Australia's got similar issues, but it's all good. US is different in its copyright, and it has to do with the constitutional rules, apparently. Apparently, it's all revolving around the Constitution as to why they do it that way. I don't know. Whatever. Okay, so coming up to some other questions. So this was an interesting question, and I have my thoughts on it, but I want to hear your thoughts first. Liz had asked, if someone wanted to be a hybrid published writer, so wanting to do self as well as trad, would it be wise for them to use 2 different pen names?
You know, there could be. I think there's pros and cons to both. I think it really depends on the situation, who the author is, and what the goals and objectives are. I know that's not like a sexy answer, but it's the truth. Like, I think that would, I don't think that you can generalize that answer. I think it's specific to the person and their situation.
I think I can generalize it.
Go ahead.
Because I've got a different one. Because if your audience is the same, why? If you're writing a crime thriller that's being traditionally published, not that you, I mean, we've just had this conversation saying that you wouldn't do it, but say you were. Say you had a crime thriller that's being traditionally published and a crime thriller that's being self-published. Why are you using pen names? The audience is the same. The reader doesn't care if a book is self-published or traditional published. They don't care.
Don't. If the audience is the same, I totally agree. But again, I would say, so that's why I'm saying it's specific to the author and their situation. Like, hey, I'm this known thriller author, but I have this fantasy book, but I don't want my reader. Right. So I think it's specific to potentially to the author and their situation and what their goals are.
Yeah, and if you're looking at, say, writing children's and writing adults, yeah, definitely. Because I don't want a child ever reading my adult stuff. Never.
Right.
Never. And so, yeah, definitely. If your readership is different, use different pen names, then that's fine. But it's, now here's a flip side of things. So again, I'm going to bring up a local writer, Soraya Lane. She's a romance writer. And she has cowboy romance, but then she writes, and that she writes under Soraya Lane. And then she has this World War II romance that she writes under Soraya M. Lane. And the reason that they are 2 different, they're very similar, but the reason why they're different names has to do with the Amazon search algorithm.
Sure.
So those are some of the other things to potentially think about. Okay. What are your key steps for traditional publication? If you've got your manuscript, you're searching for, what do you need to do?
You need a great query letter. Because here's the dirtiest secret. A lot of agents, if your query letter is not awesome, they are not going to read the manuscript. They're just not. So US-based agents are getting something like 10,000 queries a year, okay? First things first, you better have a great tagline that's going to make them want to read the query. Then you better have a great query letter that's going to make them want to read the manuscript. Most never make it to that stage. That's the truth. Most sit in a slush pile or in an email inbox and they never get a reply. So again, that's something I usually help with as an editor. I want to have a great query. Also, if you have someone that, you know, that knows the different agents and you can tailor them sometimes to the different agents, that's really going to help as well. But yeah, no, you need a fantastic query. You know, one of the funniest things is I've worked with people and they do the query letter and they leave out like a big twist or something in the book. And I said, hey, how come you didn't put that in there? And I'll never forget, they were like, well, I want the agent to be surprised when they read that. And I said, if you don't tell them about it up front, they're never going to read it. They're not going to be surprised. Never hold back. So the idea that you're going to hold something back in your query letter to surprise the agent later on and knock them off their feet, that's not going to happen. That's really not. They're not going to read it. So one of the best query letters I've ever seen, and I can't say who it was, but it literally started with, you know, here's what my book's about. And the twist is the killer has been dead the whole time. Also, that's the biggest twist of the whole book. And first thing they wrote. And I remember agents were coveting this author because they were so blown away, which means they all read it, which means they all loved the tagline. They all loved that he came out with that. Don't try to hold back and save stuff to surprise them later. Give everything you've got into the query, because they don't like the query. They're not going to read the manuscript.
Yeah, there's a formula to the queries, and I'm
Yeah,
still learning. Ryan hasn't seen my new query letters, and I'm hoping that the next time he sees them, that he goes, oh, yeah, cool, because he hadn't seen them yet. So,
yeah, I mean, they're tough. They're tough, and sometimes they got to be tailored to the agent, and they're different for different genres. I would say hopefully your editor is going to be involved in that. If you hire someone, have a real honest conversation with them about that.
Yeah, cool. I did have a question here about the steps for self. I don't know if you can answer that.
No, that's really not my forte. I have no idea. I have no idea.
But basically, regardless, I mean, okay, I'm going to flip this out. So writing query letters. One of the things in writing a query letter is writing that blurb of the book. That skill of being able to write the blurb of a book is necessary if you're a self-published writer too.
Oh yeah.
Because that is what the readers see. That
Yeah,
it's,
if you go to
it's
Amazon,
the sales material.
If you go to Amazon, the flap copy, the plot details, if you will, we call that flap copy. That's what you're going to look at to see if does this book even sound interesting. If you can't sell that, you're in trouble. Yeah.
And that's what you're selling in a query.
I would say the query, the flat copy, that has to be your best writing, period. It really does.
And it's hard.
It is hard. Yeah.
Hard. It's really, really, really hard. It's really hard. Okay. I'm just going to ask a couple of questions about the current landscape. How do you feel about the current landscape in the wake of COVID? What is happening? Do you have any beat on the pulse here?
Yeah, it's tough. Everything's changed. Everyone's still sort of figuring out their ways. Publishers are not in office. Everyone's working from home. It was really rough for a while. I think everyone's doing a really great job. I can speak to the US-based publishers here, the big five. They've all acclimated, I think, and really gotten their heads around how to do this stuff. Bookstores also, the lifeblood of the publishing industry. They're literally getting the product to the consumers. So we had a lot of shutdowns here. Bookstores closed. Bookstores are suffering. Authors can't go on their book tours anymore. They're not flying around the country doing these in-person visits. Everything's virtual. It's digital now, like we're doing right now. Everyone's got a PhD in Zoom and how to, get on Zoom and talk, and everything's virtual. Bookstores are setting those up. Everyone has really adapted to that really well. Now, sales-wise, I think sales were up something like 6%. I don't know the final, but in 2020, sales were up. That means the industry is healthy. At the same time, I think a lot of that wasn't necessarily new growth from new authors. It was things like Janet Ivanovich had a lot of her backlist discounted. People make a lot of money off that, People are at home reading. How many books does she have? Like 100. If you're going to put like 90 of them on backlist and discount them, people know that name. They go to Amazon, they see the big name, they see it's cheap, they pick it up, and then, they're hooked. So I think new writers struggled a little bit in 2020. Therefore, publishers are a little bit, I don't want to say they're playing scared, but I think they're a little apprehensive, which is, it sort of heightens everything we're talking about. You have to really have a great product to move it right now.
Yeah.
Which means get an editor and have a great query letter and do everything you possibly can to set yourself up for success.
Yeah, just on that note, guys, I recently had a rejection, which I haven't told Ryan about this one yet, so sorry. But yeah, I recently had a rejection that basically said that my manuscript wasn't unique enough to stand out. And that actually hurt.
It does hurt.
That hurt.
Kyle Mills told me, and for those of you who don't know that name, so he's written, I don't know, 15 New York Times bestsellers now. He's a good buddy of mine. And he said, you're not a real author till you have 70 rejections.
Yeah.
Cut my heart. No.
I know. Tough.
Oh. Yeah, no. I
You
think
gotta kind of take no for an answer. You just have to keep one foot in front of the other. No, it just takes time. And honestly, you don't want an agent who doesn't love your stuff to want to represent you. The worst thing that could happen to you, in all honesty, an agent is like, sure, I'll send this out. They shotgun that thing out. Every editor with every publisher is like, no, this is not for us. And then you have nowhere to go with it.
Yeah.
You're much better off getting an agent who can fight for you, who has relationships with the acquisition editors, with the publishers, who knows, hey, I just had dinner with this this editor last Tuesday, and he told me if he could find a book that had this, 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 and this in there to call him. So if you put this, 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 and then there, we might get a sale here. Those are the kind of things you want. The agent that's going to fight for you, not the biggest name, but the one that truly loves you, supports you, really has a vision for you and believes in you. That's what you want, and who will fight for you.
Yeah. Okay. So coming back to the publishing landscape, and I've seen so many different answers on this one coming from various different avenues. Should writers include the pandemic in their stories?
It's tough. It's tough.
I've seen so many different answers.
Yeah, no, everyone's got a different answer. I mean, look, it's always a yes or a no, right? Yeah, I will tell you, I probably took 10 phone calls in the last month from different author friends asking me advice on that. And I'm like, I have no idea. So I can just tell you I was sick. I'm still getting over it. I've been sick for a while. I'm feeling pretty good, but that's kind of why I'm drinking throughout this, keep my vocal cords warmed up. I don't have a lot of desire to read about, COVID and other things right now. Now, at the same time, I don't know that we have an end in sight. The world's still going to know what COVID is for a while. So if your goal is to be, like you're writing thrillers, you want to beat the headlines and be relevant and timely, probably got to mention it. By God, if you're writing fantasy, sci-fi, something you don't need to, do not mention it. People don't want to read about this anymore. I think we're all collectively just done with it, right? So I really think you have to look at it by a case-by-case basis. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a similar sort of, oh, no, not actually. Janet Reed, who's an agent for thrillers and crime, she said you can equate this to the 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
Shortly after the Twin Towers fell, people had enough. They didn't, the wounds were too much. The other example she used was actually in World War II, how there were some books and movies that were about World War II and they were trying to predict the ending, but yet until there is an end in sight, you don't know how it's going to end.
Absolutely.
And so yeah, it really depends on the story, I guess. I
would say that I have one tip on that note. If you're writing a new series, I would really recommend setting it post-COVID. Referencing it, but you're past it. That would be a big tip I have. Yeah. Set it post. Now, when is that? I don't know. No one knows. So do you set that thing in 2022 or 20? I don't know. Do you stay vague and you try not to mention it? I think right now, probably the smartest advice I would have for someone, if it's new, post-COVID world, touch on it, but move on.
Yeah, I think I've got my manuscripts, not that you've registered that, but mentally in my head, they're like 2023. Mm-hmm. And I think one of them's 2024, and I have put one of them 2025 because I'm guessing where the technology is going. I'm not. Yeah, COVID, right. Who cares? I'm guessing the technology, and I'm trying to beat the technology, so it's a bit different. Okay. Another thing about the publishing landscape, you said very, very early. We were talking about the big five, soon to become the big four. How do you feel about this possible merger between Simon & Schuster and Penguin Random House?
It's happening. So I have really great friends at Simon & Schuster, really great friends at Penguin, so I'm not going to say anything to upset anyone. I'm going to tell you that right now. I actually, in a lot of ways, I think it's great. HarperCollins looked like for a while they might absorb Simon & Schuster. Penguin and Random House, we were the big six, went to the big five. There's some precedent there. Penguin Group, they're awesome. I mean, they are phenomenal. Simon & Schuster, for my genre, they're the best. I mean,
Atria.
They really are. Emily Bessler Books, Atria Books, at Simon & Schuster, that's an imprint there. A good friend of mine is David Brown, their publicist, best in the business. Penguin's going to get really lucky getting this guy on board. I think by the way, I would say this. I think there's advantages to both of them, but being able to share metrics and data for certain things is going to benefit both publishing houses as they merge. I think it's going to go really smoothly.
Assuming it's allowed to go through, and that is...
Assuming it's going to go through, yeah.
There's the assumption. Who knows? Okay, so here's another large player in the industry, Amazon.
Amazon, yeah.
Large player. Thoughts about them and where it's going?
So I've been saying this for a while. I think in 10 years, nobody will care about the New York Times bestselling list. I think it's going to be the Amazon bestselling list. I do. Amazon's Thomas and Mercer. So again, our genre, Judy, and I don't know what everybody else writes, but Thomas and Mercer, boy, are they players. Here's what happens. Amazon's like the biggest company in the world. Like, everyone needs Amazon. They have their own authors. They promote them shamelessly. I mean, you're going to Amazon to buy whatever you buy. We all just shop all the time on Amazon, especially during a pandemic. I mean, I don't know what we do without Amazon. I'm like, I can make it 2 days. I don't need this till then. I'll just get on Amazon. But while you're there buying dish soap, you're also seeing at the bottom an ad for Stephen Kuntz. I recently just saw one from him. It just popped up, and I was like, oh, okay. Sure, what's this book about? It happens all the time. They can just shamelessly promote their own authors. So Dean Kuntz is one. Two dear friends of mine, Andrews and Wilson, Brian Andrews, Jeff Wilson. They are a phenomenal team of co-authors that they're like the busiest writers I know right now. They have like 4 series a year they're publishing traditionally, but they're also with Thomas and Mercer. And people are selling so well. Simon Gervais is a really good buddy of mine. He's there. They're a major player. I would say 5 years ago, people are like, I don't want to be published by Amazon. Today, that is not the case at all. They have real heavy hitters there, and they're a major player. Yeah,
they're definitely a major player. So we're saying that we're saying that it might be the big 4, but dare I say it, we may suddenly become the big 5 again because of Amazon.
Except they'll never do it traditionally. They'll never do it traditionally. And that's the thing, is the one drawback in Amazon, I love you, and I would write for Thomas and Mercer in a heartbeat. So this drawback, I'm not trying to be negative, but your books sort of only exist on Amazon. You're generally not going to see them in bookstores when Amazon produces them, which means you're probably not hitting a New York Times bestsellers list. Does that matter to you? That's you have to answer that. So for me, if they're going to sell your books like hotcakes and you're making a ton of money, I don't know who doesn't like that. I don't know who's going to go, no, I want to go make less money to get traditionally published by a big 5 or 4 to hit the New York Times list. That's my goal. I think most people want to make a living at writing. And Thomas and Mercer can set you up very well for that. So there's pros and cons. They don't spend a lot up front, but you make a lot more in royalties. I mean, that's a whole other conversation. But yeah, no, you're right. You've got to put them right up there with the traditional publishers, but they're never going to be traditional in the sense that we think of.
Yeah.
At the same time, they could blow everyone away because the fastest rising format is audio, and they own Audible. Go figure. Yeah. And then guess what? Kindle is pretty hot right now. eBooks, they're doing okay there. So yeah, if the day comes that where we're not producing the mass market, the hardbacks, stuff like that, Amazon's got a leg up. Yeah.
They're up with the new technologies. Let's put it like
Absolutely.
this.
They just do everything right. That's the thing. They just do everything right. Not everything, but with book stuff so far, they've just done everything right. They really have. They think of everything.
Some of the self-published writers that I know that are using their services, they might dispute that with you, but that's okay.
I'm sure they would. No, I'm speaking to their own imprints, but they just think of everything like Audible. It's incredible what they've done.
All right. So does anyone have any questions about any of this that I haven't asked? Because if not, I will quite happily move on. Give a few seconds. No, they're probably all just happily listening, watching us babble on about nothing.
I know. I hope everyone to sleep here.
Okay.
So boring, I don't even want to go write anymore. I hope that's happening with people.
Okay. So what other advice do you have for writers at, say, the early stage of the career? We're going to ask for advice for various different stages, but let's start with early stage. Early stage career. What sort of advice do you have?
Set goals. Set goals for yourself. It's a big one. Set goals. What is it? Just to write X amount of words a day to finish your manuscript? Set a goal. Set goals for yourself, and then check those boxes so you feel like you're accomplishing something.
Yeah, and set the benchmarks that are achievable. Make them SMART goals.
Yeah,
SMART.
Do not write down your first goal, become New York Times bestselling author. That's a rough first goal. Start much smaller.
SMART goals. Specific, measurable, attainable, realistic,
Absolutely.
and timely.
Yep.
Okay, what about for the more advanced writer, the ones that are still trying to say break in, like me?
Don't give up. That's a big one. Don't give up. Don't let rejection get you down. You know, keep this in mind. In my genre, Tom Clancy couldn't get published. Vince Flynn couldn't get published. They wouldn't publish John Grisham for the longest time.
Didn't
made
John
those
Grisham's
decisions?
first book fail?
Yeah, but like, who made the decision? Like, no, we're not going to publish these guys. It's never going to work out. You know how many books they've collectively sold? The publishers themselves don't always get it right. Do not take that as gospel. When an industry professional tells you no, that is not the end all. It's really not. They have proven time and time again they get it wrong. Just keep going. Don't let that beat you down. You have to be an author. You have to be strong, strong-willed, and have the temperament to face rejection and come back from that and keep going. So not to plug my own stuff, but on The Real Books By, if you go to therealbooksby.com, I did an interview with a friend of mine, Matthew Betley. He gave some great advice in that interview. I really loved it. He really talked about it took this like 18 months to write his first book, like 18 months to find an agent, like 18 months to get it published, like 18 months for it to come out. He was raw and honest about the advice that he gave, and I really agree with him. You have to have the disposition, the temperament to do this.
Yeah, cool.
So don't quit.
Don't quit.
And get a good editor. That's another thing. Get a good editor, but don't quit.
Don't quit. Yeah, definitely. I have a little note up here on my little whiteboard as a reminder. Discipline, determination, stubbornness, humility. You do have to be humble in this business, but you have to persevere.
Well, if you're not, it will humble you quickly. That's the other thing.
Oh, yeah. And so those are my little notes that I've said to myself.
I've had a lot of people call me looking for an editor, and they're like, I'm the next Vince Flynn. I can't hang up fast enough, okay? Like, that's my all-time favorite author. Like, this guy sold so many millions of copies of his books. Like, no, you're really not. And even, do you really believe that? Because Vince didn't think he was the next Vince Flynn. You know what I mean? Like, start somewhere and be humble, or the industry is going to humble you.
Okay. What can we expect to see coming from your desk in the future? What can we expect?
All kinds of stuff. So you know what my note says right now? Just get through the days. My days are crazy right now. As a book spy, as an editor, I will tell you right now, my agent is very politely breathing down my neck to finish the revisions that I have so we can go back out to the publishers that we've already talked to. I'm just like, and I have 6 kids and a wife. I'd like to find time to be a dad and a husband sometimes here and there. Mine's more like just get through the day. So a lot of stuff. If you ever follow the Book Spy, we have a lot of content coming up, some really awesome exclusive interviews, book announcements, and then a whole 2021 reading guide, which has absolutely made my life miserable ever since January 1st. Every publisher that you've ever heard of has a book they want included, and this is grown out of control. So it's not even, normally it comes out first week of January. No, I'm not even sure when it comes out yet. I'm hoping next week, but it's huge. So all kinds of stuff.
All kinds of stuff.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff.
All right, so I'm looking at the clock, and this is what happens when you have 2 talkers just talking. And we're coming up to 2 hours. So we are going to rush ahead, and we're going to go into the lightning round. You ready for this?
I'm sure.
Okay. Coffee, tea, or something else?
A lot of coffee, like enough that my doctor is like, please stop drinking it. Yeah, a lot of coffee.
Cake or ice cream?
Both.
At the same time, I take it.
Yeah, at the same time. Yeah, absolutely. Mix them. Yes.
Okay. Chocolate or potato chips?
Oh, that's a tough one for me. So yeah, that's tough. Boy, that's tough. I alternate. I do too. I'm a bad snacker in my office. Like, I don't have time for meals between like phone calls. But chocolate, certainly not dark chocolate, even though it's healthier. I'm more milk chocolate because I want the sugar, something to get me going. I eat a lot of like chocolate covered almonds because I pretend that's healthy for you. It's healthier, I suppose. but chips are a big one for me. That's like a big. I'm bad with that. I like something salty and crunchy if I'm tearing through a manuscript. Yeah, but I don't know, both.
Oh, I may have to send you some
Should be
chicken
neither,
potato
but
chips.
Yeah, right. I know should be neither, but definitely both.
Okay. What is the most bizarre food you've ever had?
Bizarre food?
Yeah.
Oh gosh, I don't even know. I'm so boring with food. I'm not a foodie at all.
Well, I saw your reaction about salted coffee.
Oh yeah, I'm not. No, thanks. No, that's not for me. No, I don't do like. No, I don't do. My wife is very into lattes and stuff. We'll go to Starbucks. There's a local chain here in Michigan called Big Beat, and my wife loves this drink called a teddy bear, and I refuse to order it because I just will not be a grown man ordering a teddy bear in front of people. I just won't do it. But I also just like regular coffee, like normal coffee. Yeah, the weirdest food I've had, I can't. I tell you what, I do not do sushi. And my son Chase insisted that we try it. Is not for me at all. I don't even know what we had. But it was not cooked, and I did not love it. And then
I love sushi though. I love it.
Oh yeah, no, not me. No, not at all. But I'm very much meat and potatoes, not a foodie. But so I can answer. So the weirdest thing, my kids didn't think I could do a hot wing challenge at a local restaurant here, and I did. And the guy who did it before me, he didn't do it because the sauce was so hot, his neck swelled and his eardrum popped, and he had to leave in an ambulance. And I made it through it, so I'm just saying. But my son also, Chase, for Christmas, somehow he got these jelly beans and pranked me, and they were ghost pepper jelly beans. And that was probably the worst thing I ever put in my mouth. Yeah. So ghost pepper, probably not the answer you thought of, but ghost pepper jelly beans. Yeah. Not
wow. Okay. Your favorite author must be Vince Flynn.
Definitely Vince Flynn. Yeah. Yeah. So unfortunately he passed away. Kyle Mills is right up there for me, who took the series over. He is one of my all-time favorites, also a friend. Favorite living author, CJ Box. If anybody here wants to read those books, you might notice a character named Ryan Steck, who's a deputy sheriff in the #1 best-selling Joe Pickett series, specifically Vicious Circle. Just saying, might be there. Huge fan of CJ Box, but I like all different kinds of authors.
Cool. Okay. Last one. Paperback or ebook?
I hate them both. I really truly do. Okay, if you make me pick the ebook, because I can read it on my iPad, I don't like mass market paperbacks because they're so small that they never stay open for me. And if you crack the spine so they do stay open, they never shut. So I'm not a fan of the mass markets at all. I genuinely hate them. And I don't know if everyone knows this, but they send out galley copies. We call them ARCs, advanced reader copies, to publishers. They're like big paperbacks, essentially, like a trade paperback size. They're just the advanced copies so that critics can read it ahead of time. I don't mind those so much. I much prefer to hold the book in my hand, but not a little tiny paperback. And I'm not a big ebook guy, but if you pushed me to it, I'd read the ebook over a tiny paperback. Yeah. Do you have a preference? I mean, this is something most people are really passionate about how they like to read. I found this.
No, for me, it doesn't matter. For me, it depends on what the story is. Sometimes I prefer the ebook. Sometimes I prefer the paperback. It's a matter. All right. Here we go. So we have really hit our limit. We are at the end of this. I think YouTube's not going to like us. So where can we find you if we're wanting more information from you? What can we do?
Everywhere. So look, all the major channels, so I run The Real Book Spy, therealbookspy.com. You can find me there. If you're looking for an editor, I'm on Publishers Marketplace. I'm on Twitter at The Real Book Spy, Facebook.com/TheRealBookSpy, kind of wherever. I'm all over.
Yeah, spot the trend here, guys. The Real Book Spy. Yeah, that's where you need to go. You need to go to The Real Book Spy. Okay, I think we are going to leave it there. For those who are here with the live we are going to do an after show sort of thing because we do have some vouchers to give away. But I think for our YouTube people, we're going to say goodbye and we're going to catch you later. If you want to get hold of me, if you have any questions, you can find me at blackwolfeditorial.com, or you can find me on Twitter at Judy L Mohr, or you can check out my own personal stuff at judylmohr.com. I'm also at Facebook. Search Judy L Mohr. Notice the trend? We're into branding here. Okay, so we will catch you all later. We'll see the live people and the after show stuff. Okay, bye.